It is my pleasure to introduce the next speakers, Dr. Sathena Chang and Dr. Lin Mei. Sathena is Associate Professor in Language Assessment at CRELLA. She conducts research on different aspects of large-scale language assessment, from construct definition, test design, rating scale to validation. She is the recipient of over 30 research grants and consultancy project commissions. Currently, she is the coordinator of the British Association for Applied Linguistics, 20 special interest groups. She also serves on the UK Association for Language Testing Association's nomination and membership committee, and on the editorial board of Innovation of Language Learning and Teaching. Lynn is an adjunct senior lecturer in applied linguistics and teacher education at Queensland University of Technology, QUT. Lynn's research interests include assessing speaking, international competence, learning-oriented assessment, and English in academic contexts. Lynn has been the recipient of research grants from the British Council, Cambridge English, IELTS, Pearson, and the SSHRC. She has published widely in journals including Language Testing, Language Assessment Quarterly, and Assessment in Education Principles, Policy and Practice. And if I may add, Lynn is a long-term collaborator and a friend of CRELLA.
Thank you, Fumi.
The title of the presentation is, do you want to share your slides now? Yeah. The title of the presentation is Introducing a Mixed Methods Approach to Analyzing Responses to Integrated Speaking Tasks, Feature Salient to Expert and Spoken Performances Across Levels. Sathena and Lynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you,
Fumi. So I will start. Thank you for coming to our presentation today. In this session, we would like to introduce a mixed methods approach that we use to analyze features of responses to two integrated speaking task types. And in this, so in the presentation, the focus will be on methods. So we will talk about sort of the thinking that went into the design of study and details of the procedures and some of the difficulties or challenges that we faced and lessons
Sathena,
learned.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We've just lost your image. So could you just try turning your camera off and on for a moment just to see if we can recover it? Obviously, we can hear you nice and clearly.
Yeah, okay.
Wonderful. That's it. You're back. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, it's
so,
gone again, but I think I'll leave you without further interruption.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the presentation will focus on the method, and then along the description of the methods, then we hope to share some highlight of the findings. But really, the purpose of the presentation will be on the methods. So integrated speaking tasks, to put it quite simply, they are tasks that involve speaking and also one or more other language skills. It could be reading a passage, or like listening to some excerpt. So typically, these tasks are used to sample general language L2 speaking abilities, for example, in terms of fluency, accuracy, or clarity, as well as elements of academic speaking skills, for example, summarizing key ideas, describing, retelling idea, etc. So I think one of the most well-known examples of the integrated speaking task would be the TOEFL IBT integrated speaking. So in the test, students will be required to read a passage on academic topic and then listen to part of a lecture on the same topic, and they're asked to summarize the content, the main ideas in speaking. So we'll look at some of the research that have been done on integrated speaking. So research have looked at like features of the input. As I mentioned, it could be reading passages, like the complexity or the level of difficulty of the reading passages, or the audio recording. And then there's a body of work by Frost et al. Really interesting work on how students made use of the sources in their responses, the pattern and the accuracy, etc. And then there's also work on the rating scales. But as a whole, compared to the research that have been done on integrated writing, the research on integrated speaking is quite slim, particularly for shorter integrated speaking tasks. I myself have done more work on integrated writing as well. One of the recent study, meta-analysis study, that I and a colleague in Japan, Professor Junko Yamashita, we used meta-analysis approach, which is like a statistical approach to combine studies on the same topic so that we can sort of generalize the results to have a clearer idea of what happens around the research topic. So that study, we look at the studies on integrated speaking in assessment. So what we found is that students' performance, the quality, the features of their integrated speaking, integrated writing is affected by modality of input, and as well as the levels of proficiency. So modality of input is a task variable. So it depends on what input you give to student, and also their proficiency, the level of proficiency. So when we looked at integrated speaking, then we are thinking, okay, how would modality of input and level of proficiency influence integrated speaking performance? So this is like the start of the research. And then Lynette and I started thinking about research questions and also a methodology. And we put in a proposal, and luckily it was successful. And this current study is funded by Pearson Test of English Academic Research Grants in 2021. So the research we're sharing today is actually built upon a previous study that Lynette and I did on two integrated writing task formats. The study was published in Language Testing. So if you're interested, you can go and check that that article. So the study, the focus of the current study really is to help us to understand the construct of two integrated task speaking task formats more deeply, especially in terms of two aspects. The first one, to explore what features in candidate responses are observable to human judges. We want to know when a rater listens to a performance, what features the rater can identify, what features are observable. And then the next question, we want to know how these categories of features can be found in student responses across proficiency levels. So these are the two specific research questions we had for our studies. So the first question focused on the salient features that we can identify on the two formats. The first format is reading, viewing, speaking. So students are given a graph to look at. And the second format is listening, speaking. I will talk about a bit more about the two task formats in a minute. And the second question, as I mentioned, focus on the differences across the levels of proficiency. So the two task types were taken from the Pearson Test of English. So the first task is reading, viewing, speaking. So students are required to read a graph and also process the information, the textual information about the graph. So the test interface would look something like this, and they are asked to summarize or describe the most important information from the graph in 40 seconds. And then the listening speaking task requires students to listen to an excerpt of lecture, and then they retell the content in their own words. So for this study, we received a data set of 150 audio recordings on each task. So these samples are from 3 levels of speaking proficiency. So These were the research questions we wanted to find out. The first one, the features observable to human judges, and then the second question, how these features can be found in student responses across proficiency level. So we adopted a mixed methods approach. So first of all, in terms of what features, we want to use a qualitative approach through focus group discussion. And then from there, we use the qualitative approach to study the differences across levels through text quality analysis. So we will talk about how we did the two phases in more detail. So the idea really is that we start with the qualitative approach to give us an idea of the topic that we're exploring, and then we want to transfer some of the findings to a larger set of data. Okay, so we have phase one qualitative, and then phase two, phase one qualitative and then phase two quantitative. So these are the main steps that involved in phase one. So we first started with 4 panelists. So each of them ranked 10 performances on each task, and they noted their reasons for their decisions, and then they come to the group discussion with their notes. And then we transcribed and coded the data with NVivo 12. And then from there, we develop a rich profile. And Lynn is going to talk about the detail of these steps in a moment. And then from there, we go into the phase two, when we have to deal with 150 performances per task. So we reduce the 60 features into 8, and then we develop coding scheme and rating descriptors in order to enable us to look at the responses in detail. And that involves training co-raters and establishing reliability. And then I will talk about these steps in more detail later: data preparation, coding, and rating. And once we have done all that, then we analyze the features across level by using one-way ANOVA. So now I'm going to pass on to Lynn to talk about the qualitative steps in more depth. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Sathena. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the features that were observable, that were noted by our expert panelists. I'll just tell you a little bit more about our expert panelists to begin with. We were very privileged to have 4 expert panelists, and 2 of these panelists were language assessment experts who were very experienced in developing and researching summary tasks. And the other 2 panelists were experienced EAP, English for Academic Purposes teachers, who regularly designed and used integrated tasks in their teaching and assessment practices. So we had that balance, we felt, with our expert panel. Okay. So we had, in the qualitative phase, we had 2 main data sources. The first one was rater notes. And this is kind of interesting because we asked the raters to, prior to the expert panel, we asked them, sorry, I should say panelists, we asked them to rank 10 of the describe image performances and 10 of the summarise lecture performances in terms of strongest to weakest, most effective to least effective performances. And we asked them to take notes with, justifying the reasons that for their rankings there. So that was a very important step prior to the actual panel discussion. Okay, and we didn't tell the panelists, of course, about the fact that that these performances had been selected in terms of representing different proficiency, different speaking proficiency outcomes in the Pearson test. So they came to it kind of blind in a sense. They also weren't told that it was the same candidate who was doing both of those performances as well. Okay, so that's a very important sort of setup. That so our expert panelists came with their rater notes. Okay. And we decided that we would collect those notes. And this, I think, was a really important step for us in terms of our understanding of the observable features. So I'll just sort of take you through the kind of a sample of the notes that we got from our panelists, and then also kind of what that enabled us to do in terms of understanding the features that were salient to experts in terms of an integrated speaking response. Okay, so what in a nutshell, looking at, collating and analysing the panelists' notes enabled us to really get a very rich profile of their rankings and their reasons for rankings, the characteristics of performances that were ranked in the low, mid and high kind of rankings for each panelist. A caveat is that not all panelists agreed with everything. It wasn't complete agreement, but I don't think that that's, a really important feature at this point. So I just wanted to show you an example of one panelist, a segment of one panelist's notes so that you can see the richness that this brought to us as researchers, in understanding this. Because, I mean, we could have simply said, okay, you brought your notes to the panel discussion, take them home with you. We'll just analyse the discussion. But we decided to do this, and I'm really glad that we did in terms of the outcomes. So I just want to show you very briefly that here, as I said, is a segment, just an excerpt from one panelist's notes on the describe image task. And I just want to draw your attention to the third column down there. You'll see that it's performance number 33, and this panelist has ranked this performance as the weakest. Okay, it's ranked at number 10. And then you can see that, the reasons have been jotted down, and then I've later typed them out. Mispronunciation, grammatical mistakes, word order problems make it actually difficult to understand. Mostly reads from the diagram, only one sentence of their own, which was unfinished, and I don't think the candidate actually understood the diagram really. So you can see the kind of depth of information that panelists were, very generously providing for us in their notes there. So I just wanted to see, you to see actually what these notes kind of looked like. Okay, and then in the next slide, I'll just talk briefly about what we were able to then do after collating and analysing these panelists' notes. So as I said before, it enabled us to get a very rich and detailed profile of kind of characteristics of performances that panelists ranked in as low, mid or high. And just, we can just have a look at the first of each of these, and you can see that features noted in lower ranked responses. Here's a sort of comment that a panelist noted. From this description, it's very difficult to discern what is being described. And then in the mid-ranked responses, we've got, a clear systematic introduction. But then if you look at the next point, clear intro, then goes into detail, but doesn't complete the task. So again, you're getting a profile of something that would be classified or ranked in the mid kind of level of performances there and the lower level of performances. And then if we go to the third column, you'll see features noted in high ranked responses to the describe image task. And you've got, shows full understanding of the chart, systematic and accurate description of the diagram. So a lot of very important features were coming through in these, kind of profiles that we're able to establish. So I think it's a really valuable thing to do. So if you're thinking of doing research like this, then I'd encourage you to not let the raters or the experts go home with their notes without actually considering using them. Okay, I'll now talk about our second source of qualitative data, which was the panel discussion. And actually, Sathena has already mentioned some of these features, so I'll just sort of take you through some key points here about the panel discussion. Our purpose in holding this expert panel discussion was to identify the features of spoken summary elicited through these two quite different tasks, even though they're both, integrated speaking tasks. The input, the modality of the input was very different, and that we think was quite important in terms of the responses from candidates. So we wanted them to provide us with insights into the nature of effective spoken summary from the two source types, which they certainly did. So as I said, prior to that, they'd already listened to the responses. They had, all of the sort of materials. They had for the lecture, for example, they had a transcribed, lecture as well as they were able to listen to it, so that they knew exactly what the candidates were actually responding to, of course. And as I said, they, ranked them, they had their notes, and then based on their notes, they came to the panel discussion with their notes. Sathena and I facilitated the discussion, and essentially we asked the panelists to discuss their rankings of each performance, and then we asked them to, not only justify it, but actually to engage in discussion. And actually, panelists were able to articulate their reasons, they were able to co-construct understanding of features, and in some cases, were persuaded a little bit differently, which is all the beauty of a panel discussion. So the panel discussion was almost 2 hours, and we analysed it through both deductive and inductive approaches. I mean, obviously there were some features that we knew would probably be noted, but then it was very much a case of listening through the panel discussion several times before I even started thinking about a draft coding scheme. Okay. So sorry, this is the thing. If you could just go back, I just want to make one more point. Okay, yeah. So the themes of the discussion, including the features of the two performances, the panelists also were able to talk about their ranking processes, which was, a real insight for us, and that's a story for another day, but that's important that this was actually something that was elicited. And also their perceptions of the integrated tasks and the nature of a summary task. So there was some really rich data that was elicited through that 2-hour panel discussion. I'm going to briefly talk about the 285 segments that related to the features of the spoken responses that were coded, although a lot of other data was coded. Okay. So as I said, I listened several times to the recording and just sort of immersed myself in it, and enjoyed the messiness of it and the complexity of it, and then transcribed it and read through it several times, started highlighting things, and then got through to a draft coding scheme. Okay, and then I used NViva, and I'll talk briefly about what I think are the strengths of NViva if you're not familiar with it and you're considering coding qualitative data. And yes, eventually there was a total of 16 feature categories that we identified, and Sathena and I co-coded 25% of the data. We had an 87% agreement rating, and then what we did is we discussed each of the sort of codings that we weren't in agreement with, and then sort of recoded them and were in agreement after that. So it's quite a robust kind of process that we went through there. So yeah, the coding scheme was trialled and finalised, and then I went through the whole set with NViva. I just want to make one point before we go on, which was the beauty of the panel discussion is that it is co-construction. So it's articulating ideas, but it's also co-construction. Whereas the rater notes are valuable in a different way because they're an individual initial response to candidate performances. So each of these kind of data sets complemented, but also gave us some, differing sort of insights. Okay. Just in case you haven't used NViva or you're kind of thinking, what is Lynn talking about here? I just wanted to give you an example of kind of, once you've coded something, and in this case, I was coding for the task, which was the describe image task, the reading, viewing, and speaking task. And I was coding for consistency of performance. And you can just see that this is, once you've done the coding, you export your results, and, you can export them in different forms, but I like to have them in this kind of form. And so we can just see immediately that, expert panelist number 1 made 3 comments related to the consistency of performance in this particular task. And then we can see exactly what those comments are. You can actually, while you're in NViva, you just click on one of those comments, and then that will take you back to the whole kind of transcription of the panel. So you can also see the context for that comment as well, which is really useful while you're coding in vivo. And you can see that expert 2 actually had some comments as well, and actually 7 comments, and then we can just see some of those comments there that were coded under consistency of performance for describe image. So this is kind of what we're looking at in terms of, you know, after coding and then exporting, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so what did we find? This enabled us to identify 16 features of the integrated speaking performances that were relevant to, were observable and salient to these experts as they went about ranking the performances. So I just want to, I know it's very kind of wordy slide in a sense, and lots of numbers there. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of points on it that we find quite interesting. So you can see that the first column is a feature, so there are 16 features there. Then we've got DI, which is actually the describe image, so that was the task. The next one is the, you know, the retell lecture, so the summarize the lecture, and then the panelists, so who actually commented, who made these comments in the actual, you know, panel discussion. So I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things here which came out very, very strongly and helped to influence the next stage of data analysis, which Sathena will be talking about in a moment. So if you look down to the third feature there, which is consistency of performance, you'll see that actually that was noted, you know, in 10 comments from the describe image performance. It wasn't noted at all in the retell lecture. And so that was a feature that that actually pointed to something that's towards the end, the second last feature, which is reading directly from the prompt. And again, we can see that this was a, you know, a salient feature for the describe image task, which it was not a feature of responses for the retell lecture. So there was quite a bit of text in this image, and the weaker candidates in particular were simply reading out the text. And so that was yeah. And as soon as they got into their own kind of tried to use their own words to word up some findings, that's when the consistency dropped off or was noticeably different within the performance. So that's just kind of some insights that we got there in these 16 features. So I'll hand you back to you, Sathena. Oh no, I've got to talk about challenges. Sorry, I forgot about that. That's a challenge. Okay, so just briefly, in a reflection on this kind of methodology, I guess the first thing as I highlighted was the decision to collect and analyse the notes and the rankings that each panel made. I've initially thought that I would include these in the in vivo kind of analysis in the coding, and then I realised that it could actually be distorting the features, because this was what, you know, this was what the expert panelists brought with them, and that was what they were actually talking about. So I thought, no, I want to look at them separately, and, you know, then code the panel discussion sort of separately. So yeah, we sort of had quite a few discussions about what to do with the rater notes, and the second kind of challenge, and it's always a challenge when you start coding, is how fine-grained you're going to get. You know, how many micro categories are you going to get down to, and how useful are they? So as an example, I could have coded just one feature language. I ended up coding it separately according to 5 dimensions, which was general language control, fluency, pronunciation, syntax, and vocabulary. So they were all coded separately for both tasks, and intelligibility was also coded separately because we felt that had an element of co-construction, you know, the listeners kind of involved there as well as that. So those were some discussions that Sathena and I had. Yeah. Okay, Sathena.
Thank you. Okay, so after phase 1, then we had to sort of deal with the question of how we can analyze the features for 150 performances on each task. So remember this diagram we showed earlier in the presentation. So we have dealt with the procedures in phase 1. Now we move to phase 2. As mentioned before, we have to sort of reduce number of features in order to make it practical to analyze the 150 the performances. So we sort of look at them and have some discussion. So what we decided in the end was that we have two groups of features. The first one was related to completeness, accuracy, and type of reproduced ideas, whereas the second group covers intelligibility, fluency, language, content, and organization. So I hope you agree with me that the first group, they relate more to sort of like the construct of integrated speaking, that how students make use of source tests. So we really, this is something we found really fascinating, interesting. So we wanted to do in-depth coding at the level of idea units, whereas the second group of categories, we did rating at the level of whole performance in a way that there's only one rating per category for the entire performance. All right, so let me just go through how we prepare the data. So first of all, we had to segment the spoken responses. As mentioned before, we want to use the unit of idea unit. So adopted from the definitions from Cross et al. Studies and close seminal study on idea unit. So I'm only going to show some example. There are more sort of definition here, but here I show you the main one. All main clauses and subordinate clauses are separate idea unit. So like in this example, so using this definition, we were able to identify the different idea unit. And then the another definition we use is sometimes they are not clauses, but they sort of like added some illustrative information. For example, in this example, and Prince's work, like a detective novel murder investigation, becomes one of the hunting down something. Okay, so according to the first definition, all this would be just one idea unit, but we decided to add this definition to allow us to separate any illustrative information, because I think from the point of view of understanding how students selected idea from sources, this is actually valuable information. And also because the panelists mentioned like features like this, so we wanted to be able to include these in our analysis. So in the end, a total of 1,144 idea units were identified in our data set. So we have to put them in Excel spreadsheets like that. So we put the student idea unit, one idea unit per row, and then the idea from the source test per column. So the three things that we did, the first one, we look at, as I mentioned, this is analysis at the level of idea unit. So we do this per row of data. So first of all, we needed to find out what ideas students selected from input. So we match the idea from the student output to the ideas from the input, and then sort of put out, okay, which idea it was that student summarized. And then we looked at the types of the ideas, whether it is idea for idea, or whether the student combined two ideas from the sources, or whether it's a case of like a macro proposition, which is like a summary, like the combines three or more ideas units from the source text. And then the last thing we did was to look at the accuracy of the idea. When we first started, we only had two categories following previous studies, and then we felt that we actually wanted to expand the categories into 4. So we look at the different levels of accuracy. So in the end, 20% of the data were double coded, and then with an agreement of about 94%. So I'm just going to show you some examples of what I meant by type of reproduction unit for unit. So in this example, you see the sources. The idea from the source is in 1905, Prince published a work. And then on the right-hand side, you have the student output. That's a book published in 1905 by Prince. Okay, so that is a unit for unit web reproduction. And then you have reproduction of combining 2 units. So in 1905, Prince published a work, and then it was a study of a woman. So, but in the student output, the student actually combined the 2 ideas. And then you have the macro proposition where students actually make use of 3 or more idea units. And then I'm going to show you the level of accuracy that we were able to identify from our data. So again, this is the input idea. In 1905, Prince published a work entitled The Dissociation of a Personality. So that it is a book published in 1905 by Prince. So we felt that was quite accurate. And then in 1909, there was a publication by Prince, so the date wasn't correct. And then you have 1945, Prince was one of the person who was into his personality. So it got some keywords, but the idea was not like, it was pretty much distorted. And then you have the last one, he became a prince. So that's sort of made up or really inaccurate from our point of view. So this is just to show you how we sort of look at the data. And I think I'm going to skip some slides to look at, let me just look at this and then I will go to the finishing slide. So for the rating, as I mentioned, there's 3 categories about the source of, about the idea unit. We did it unit by unit. But here for the overall sort of features of the performance in terms of these 5 features related more to general L2 speaking abilities, we did rating. So what we did was to develop descriptors, analytic descriptors, 5-point scale per category. So we rated all the performances. So the purpose of today's presentation really is to show or to explain how we designed our study and sort of developed the procedures, because when we were doing this studies, there was quite a lot of questions and we couldn't find a lot of resources. So we hope that like today's presentation would be useful to help to share some of the insights of how study like this can be done. And of course, the challenges of doing like analysis like this is very time consuming. And I'm going to go to the challenges here. I think the solution really is that you need to don't forget to breathe, and you need to go for a walk if you need, and persevere. And then what we found useful was that to ask for advice from colleagues who have done similar analysis. And then we have to also accept as researchers that there's no one perfect coding scheme. So we really have to make decisions based on principles and then to apply the scheme or descriptors as consistently as we can. And then we hope that you see the value of this kind of approach, even though time consuming, even though chaotic, it really shows us a lot of rich data about the nature of integrated skills. And then to quote Tony's wording, that would actually help us to allow the test results to be used and interpreted in teaching and learning. Thank you. I think I'll stop here.
Thanks, Sathena.
Sorry, I'm just trying to bring Fumi on screen and I ended up bringing Tony on the screen instead. Apologies for that.
Thank you so much, Sathena and Ling. This was a really beautifully designed and executed study. I'm really happy to know more about that research. We have a couple of questions and we have maybe 2 or 3 minutes left. So first question is about implications. What do you think are the implications of this study for scoring test taker performance on different tasks and validity of current approach? Of course, this was not methodology related, but if you could give us some insights, that would be great.
Yeah, I think as we what we found that there are really 2 types of features. One is related to integrated speaking skills. I have students make use of sources, and then we can assess that through accuracy of idea, number of ideas, and also the source use pattern. Because we didn't really talk about results today, but we found differences between the task types. For example, when students summarized from the graph, they were able to sort of achieve high level accuracy because they can read the information in front of them. Whereas when they summarize from listening, so the accuracy really drops. So that actually show us that we have to bear that in mind when we think about the scale, like what level of accuracy is achievable in terms of the different input validity, modality of input. So and then I think the other implication would be the importance of incorporating features that we can actually explain, because we can, even though this take a long time, but I'm sure there will be ways to operationalize this into something more efficient. But results on this can actually tell students what they need to improve or what can be improved in terms of their integrated speaking skills. So this is quite transparent from our point of view. So we really hope to see more of that in assessment practice.
Can I just ask you one clarification question? So you had 3 groups, like strong, borderline, or weak. I can't remember what terminology used. But what was sort of the approximate levels of those 3 groups? Is it like
so they,
B2 or yeah?
Yeah, so I think the lower one would be sort of like starting from B2 and then up to C1. Yeah.
So would you suggest that those tasks are relevant to like B2 above levels?
Yes and no, because we found that difference between when the input is different. Okay, so when the input is reading and also graph, then lower level student can actually reproduce ideas quite accurately, as I mentioned before. And also the number of ideas they selected was actually quite similar to the higher level students. Whereas, so this could be like the scaffolding idea that Christine was talking about earlier on. So these are quite effective for lower level students, whereas the higher level students didn't really show much improvement because that is the limit of the time as well and the feature of the task. Whereas in the listening task, there are a lot of more scope for the higher level student to show the ability to include ideas and then the ability to because from listening, so a lot of other processes were involved because they actually have to process information. They have to hold the information in their mind. So the number of ideas reproduced were quite different across the levels and also the level of accuracy as well. So I guess to take away from our study is that we have to consider these features in relation to, number 1, the features of the task, and also number 2, the level of the students. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Lynn, could I ask you another question? Anyway, let's use 1 or 2 more minutes. The panelist notes showed that different examiners seem to pay attention to different performance aspects and features. What are the implications for marking frameworks like scoring approach? Does it just mean that panelists have just different, approach and then backgrounds, and then it is just realized in the approach? Or does it suggest that the marking frameworks and scoring approach should be analytical rather than holistic? Or do you have any suggestion about that?
Well, the one thing that became really obvious through the panel discussion was that the panelists themselves were kind of torn in a way about how to kind of how much to put into language, into the, how much did they value language in terms of the response and how much did they value content. And so when they had a response that was, showed, quite highly proficient language features, perhaps in vocabulary, syntax, pronunciation, but the content, was either inaccurate or incomplete, they really weren't sure about what to do with those kind of responses. And each of them brought very different beliefs actually about, that it was an academic speaking task. So, at least one of the panelists said, well, it's all about content. Language is just the vehicle through which, this content, and that's what we're focusing on. Whereas other, panelists felt that language was equally important to content. So getting back to your point, Fumi, I think that it does support perhaps analytic rating scales where different features of the performance can be focused upon, and also that raters can have their attention directed, as to certain features of the performance.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn and Sathena. Thanks.